Right then guys, it's PSL or Nathan here, and I'm here for my first proper F1 discussion video. Now I've contemplated doing these in the past, but with the recent news around Bernie Ecclestone losing his place as CEO of Formula 1 management and Formula 1 group as a whole, I thought I'd finally make one because, well, partly because I do actually like Bernie Ecclestone and partly because, well, the business of Formula 1 interests me as much as the actual racing it produces. So, as we all know recently, Bernie Ecclestone, who was CEO of Formula 1 Group, has now been ousted by Liberty Media, well specifically Chase Carey, who's now the new CEO. Bernie Ecclestone's in some kind of honorary position, which basically means absolutely nothing. He's in an advisory role, and Chase Carey has taken over along with Sean Bratches and Ross Brawn. Now, firstly, I do want to say, well, I've already said it, that I am quite a big fan of Bernie Ecclestone. I guess kind of more as a person, as a personality, than as a actual CEO of the sport. let me put it this way. Whenever an interview of Bernie Ecclestone comes up on BBC, Channel 4, Sky, wherever, if an interview of Bernie Ecclestone comes up, I will watch that straight away. I look forward to interviews from Bernie Ecclestone more so than even Kimi Räikkönen, and Kimi Räikkönen interviews are absolute gold. But Bernie Ecclestone, I know he's very contentious, very controversial, but fundamentally you've got to admire what he's done for the sport over the years. With all the Concord agreements and everything he's done, he's organised, professionalised the sport, got everyone tied down to commercial agreements, Concord agreements for the teams in the FIA, and he has made the sport more regular, more predictable, more worldwide, and much more commercialised, much more successful, and much more accessible to audiences. Now, I'm not going to say the guy's brilliant, God no. I'd argue that come the turn of the 21st century, especially once tobacco advertising in Formula 1 was kind of put on lockdown for most territories, I'd argue once that happened, Bernie Ecclestone's positive influence in the sport did kind of die down, because everything he's done, especially in 1995, I believe was the pivotal year when the FIA sold the worldwide TV rights for such a stupidly low amount. You can't deny that Bernie Ecclestone has done a lot for the sport, and sure, in the mid-90s, lots of deals he did, such as the Concord agreements in the 90s, were largely to his benefit. Regardless, he has still done a lot for the sport up to that point, even if not so much after that point. Anyway, when the news was first announced that Bernie Ecclestone has been, according to him, forced out of the position as CEO and being replaced by Chase Carey, I saw lots of people on Twitter who were very happy about the news, and lots of people who were optimistic for the sport's future, because even if you take Bernie Ecclestone out of the picture, CVC, that was just run by a group of German financiers. I've said it before and I'll say it again, I do think it's good that Liberty Media has taken over CVC shares, because I think a media company is much better at generating entertainment and promoting a sport than some German financiers were. So I saw lots of people who were happy about Bernie Ecclestone leaving, and just to avoid any misconceptions, Bernie Ecclestone is a commercial rights holder, and lots of people are quite annoyed with Formula 1 at the moment. I'm not going to lie, I think Formula 1's gone downhill since 2008. To be fair, I think the season just gone is one of the best in recent years, but as much as people would like to pin that down on Bernie Ecclestone, you can't really do that. It depends what specifics you're clawing at. So, lots of people say the racing isn't good enough, or, the tyres are rubbish, or the engines aren't loud enough, and the hybrids are too expensive, and all this and that. But by and large, Bernie Ecclestone, or, the commercial rights holder as a whole, Formula 1 management, they're only a third responsible when it comes to the technical regulations. Now, that's not to say that Bernie Ecclestone has nothing to do with rule changes in Formula 1, because of course he does. I believe the voting system is a third of the votes when it comes to rule changes in Formula 1, a third of the votes come from the FIA, a third of the votes are the commercial rights holder, which up until a few days ago was pretty much single-handedly Bernie Ecclestone, and then the other third of the votes are split between the teams. So if you think that Bernie Ecclestone being removed from any real sort of power is going to change the sport and produce quicker cars, better cars, or fix any number of the problems in Formula 1 at the moment, I don't think that's going to happen, because again, they've only got a third of the votes, and ultimately any regulation change comes down to the FIA and the World Motorsport Council. And as I said, Bernie Ecclestone, he's put forward quite a few rule changes himself. I mean, he's put forward a lot, some of which have gone through. I mean, double points, that was his idea, which failed spectacularly. The radio ban, which he proudly announced a couple of years ago, which he put that forward and that got passed, and he was proud of that radio ban, and then that unravelled in quite a big way in the middle part of this season. And from that perspective, I can see why people would be annoyed with Bernie Ecclestone and why people are glad to see him go, because lots of the rule changes he has put forward or pushed in recent years have been very gimmicky. I mean, sprinklers, that's one he keeps bringing up from time to time. Reverse grids, he mentioned a couple of times at the start of last year. And the medal system, remember that. 2009, before we got the point system that we know today, 25, 18, 15 points, as we know it, he wanted the medal system, which is a very interesting concept. Whoever got the most race wins in a season won the championship, which is such a stupid system. I'm glad it never went through, because it's needlessly complicated. On the flip side of the argument, the engines in Formula 1, which lots of people don't like for being too quiet, too complicated, but Bernie Ecclestone very quickly into the 2014 season said he hated them, because again, he's only a third responsible for them. It's impossible to say whether he voted for them to go through, whether he pushed for that, but he certainly tried to get rid of them. He tried to bring in a second sort of engine, and in fact Jean Todt was even behind that policy. The FIA was as well, to bring in a customer engine which was non-hybrid and much cheaper, which would have completely unravelled the hybrid era of Formula 1, which never got through. But I mean, in that case, the FIA and Jean Todt are just as responsible as Bernie Ecclestone for that. But that's, I mean, I've kind of gone off on a bit of a rant there, but if you're happy about Bernie Ecclestone going because of anything to do with the sporting regulations, this shouldn't change a thing. I mean, it was never his responsibility to change the sporting regulations, and yes, he did have a third of the votes, and yes, he did press forward some very bad and very interesting changes, but that was never really his job. All that changes now that he's been ousted out of the CEO position, all that changes is that he can't physically make the votes himself on behalf of the commercial rights holder. He's only in an advisory position now. And it's up to Chase Carey, Sean Bratches, and most importantly Ross Brawn to dictate the commercial rights holders 1/3 of the total votes. But fundamentally, the sporting regulations come down to the FIA. As much as people like to use Bernie Ecclestone as a scapegoat, quite a lot of it isn't to do with him. Now, moving away from that, because more importantly, what Liberty Media have actually invested in is the broadcasting rights, track hosting fees, any merchandise to do with Formula 1, anything to do with Formula 1 which isn't the rules of Formula 1. But looking at this article on BBC Sport, which I will leave a link to down in the description, and on this, Chase Carey has mentioned that he looks to exploit new technologies to be able to grow the sport, which is good, you know, social media and anything along those lines, any more kind of new media which F1 has been very cautious to dip its toe into. And it says that Liberty looks to protect the historic races in Europe. That's all good, and I was a little bit worried that Chase Carey and Liberty Media, as an American organisation and an American person, I was worried that they would prioritise American races over European ones, but he does seem to say that he does want to keep the traditional European races there, which is good, and you'd argue which Bernie Ecclestone wouldn't have done that because the fees he was asking for were extortionate. Well, here's why I'm a little bit concerned, because Chase Carey says, and I quote, "I don't think we will make the races more affordable, we will make them more successful," which is slightly concerning. It's well established that the track hosting fees are too expensive. Lots of places which don't have their race partially funded by the state. It's becoming tricky for them to be able to host a Grand Prix, and I'm sure Liberty Media, I'm sure they've got a clear plan on how to make F1 more accessible, more far-reaching, more profitable, and hopefully they do know what they're doing, and hopefully they can keep places like Silverstone on the Formula 1 calendar. But the fact it says that he doesn't want to make it more affordable is slightly concerning, and it does make me think that what's he going to do which Bernie Ecclestone hasn't done? I'm sure Chase Carey will do something. Whether it proves successful or not is what I'm slightly concerned about, but regardless, it's good to see something happen. But having said that, it's almost like a running joke for Bernie to put the British Grand Prix in a pretty precarious position and then worrying the British media before he sorts out a deal anyway. That's happened, going off of my memory, at least twice this century alone. I don't even think it's incompetence. I think he just likes creating anxiety within the media, and that's just how he entertains himself. And yes, he has lost some Grand Prix over all of these years, but he's done a pretty good job of keeping most of them here for this long. And the other main commercial sticking point, which people have got very angry at Bernie Ecclestone for, is the move to pay TV in recent years. Now, we're actually quite lucky in the UK, well I am, I mean, it depends where you're watching this from, but in the UK, we're quite lucky to an extent, because we got Sky TV, which have all the races live, which you have to pay for, and then Channel 4, who I think up until 2019 have half of the races live. But from my understanding, and correct me if I'm wrong, lots of places, especially in continental Europe, Formula 1 has been behind a paywall for years. I think in places like Spain and Italy, it's been behind a paywall, I think, since 2008 or around that time. Coincidentally, and I don't think it is a coincidence, ever since CVC came in. Because of course CVC, it's a private equity firm. They came into F1 to make money. They came in, and bearing in mind they took out massive loans to make an investment in Formula 1. And I think it was around 2006 when the move started for F1 to be broadcast on more pay TV networks. But I think this is what happens when big companies make big investments into a sport. Whether it be CVC as a private equity firm, or to a slightly lesser extent Liberty Media as a media company, they both have come in to make money from the sport. But it was said back in September of last year by the president and CEO of Liberty Media that Liberty Media do intend to move F1 even more so towards pay TV services. So I think it's still going to happen, much like when CVC owned a majority share of Formula 1, and now with Liberty Media, I think there is still that drive to move towards pay TV, which I personally am not that happy with. I know lots of people aren't, and it just doesn't bode well. It's strangling the sport's future and bringing in new fans, I think, anyway, which I know they might be able to recover through other strategies possibly which Liberty Media have got lined up. Now this is all just speculation on my part. Obviously, not all of this is confirmed, none of this has gone into action yet. I mean, Liberty Media have only just recently, formally, completely taken over Formula 1. They haven't had a chance to make any significant changes yet other than the removal of Bernie Ecclestone. But I've done some digging, I've done some looking around, and that's just how I see the sport's going to change. It seems to be going down a similar path that it has gone down for the past 10-11 years. Long and short of it, I think Liberty Media can't do any worse than CVC. As much as I love Bernie Ecclestone, I think one of the worst things CVC did was keep Bernie Ecclestone in a position of power and have Bernie Ecclestone essentially represent all of CVC by himself. But I think it's a shame to see Bernie Ecclestone go as CEO of Formula 1 Group. I mean, personally, I didn't think Bernie Ecclestone was going to go until he died. I mean, he said that himself in several interviews. And now he's in more of an advisory position, which I think is probably the best place for him to be. He can still push forward his radical ideas, some of which are good, some of which not so much. I mean, double points, that's not such a great idea. although strangely nothing has been mentioned by Liberty, at least as far as I can tell, about amending the price structure within the sport, which at the moment is hilariously one-sided. Bernie Ecclestone talked about adopting a fairer system similar to the Premier League style of distributing prize money about 6 months ago, which hopefully he does still push for, because that is one of the big issues in terms of the longevity of keeping teams within Formula 1, which fundamentally is the lifeblood of the sport. And hopefully he does still push for that and Liberty Media consider it. And I know Bernie Ecclestone talked about it, but that doesn't really mean anything. I mean, Bernie, you take him seriously, but not literally, I find. But I'm pretty confident that if Liberty Media formally announced that they were going to address the distribution of prize money, that they would do it, and that is crucial to keeping teams in Formula 1 and fundamentally Formula 1 alive. But anyway, as I said at the start of the video, this has just been a discussion video for me, just me verbalising my ideas, my thoughts, my opinions on where Formula 1 is going to be. I'll be interested to hear your thoughts and opinions on Bernie Ecclestone being forced out and Liberty Media coming in down in the comments. And yep, I'll see you guys in the next video, which will be more of the usual that I produce. So I'll see you then.